Welcome to the Attitudes Podcast. This podcast is the brainchild of Attitude Foundation and Northcott to chat about attitudes about disability. In 2021, the University of Melbourne published a nationwide survey on Australia's attitudes on disability, which will be the focal point of our Season 1. I'm Angel Dixon, your host. I'm a person with disability. I dedicate my time to furthering the inclusion of people with disability. I'm a model and the former CEO of the Attitude Foundation. In an effort to bring life to the numbers in this survey, each week I'll be joined by current and former board members and one friend of the Attitude Foundation to discuss one of the survey's findings. Today I'm joined by Emily Dash, and we'll be discussing the topic that 78% of people agree that people are unsure of how to act around people with disability. Welcome, Emily.
Hello, Angel. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I'd love, Emily, if you could introduce yourself before we get going.
Absolutely. So my name is Emily Dash. I'm a writer, actor, a producer across theatre and screen. And I am very proud to be on the board of the Attitude Foundation as a director.
All of our board members of Attitude Foundation are all across Australia, but today I am in Queensland on the Gold Coast in the land of the Yagamba people.
I am coming to you from Sydney, New South Wales, and on Gadigal country today.
Emily, today I was hoping that we could dissect one of the survey topics that I guess is close to all of our hearts, but I imagine you have a lot to say about this particular topic.
Yeah.
And the topic is that 78% of people agreed that people are unsure how to act around people with disability.
The first thing that strikes me is it's a very, very large number.
Is it shocking to you how large the number is, or based on your life experience, do you find it not surprising?
It's not at all surprising. I wish I was more surprised. I think lots of people, as a person with disability, lots of people have always been unsure how to approach me. And I think that the key with that is definitely people who haven't had much exposure to people with disability. So rather than risk saying the wrong thing, they, put me in a box. Not literally, of course. I've never been physically put in a box, but, they make assumptions. And that can be anything from asking intrusive personal questions to invading my personal space to outright exclusion and discrimination. And the ramifications of that, I think it's important to say, can range from sort of mildly annoying to devastating and, unfortunately, in some cases, even deadly. For example, personal questions that I get asked: how do you have sex? Or what happened to you? Or what's wrong with you? Or those kinds of things. It's just things that it's none of anybody's business. The other one is invading personal space. Certainly things like people just reaching out and touching my hand, or if I'm in my manual wheelchair, pushing my wheelchair without asking me, or trying to give me a hug, or, when I don't want one. People get very sort of touchy-feely, I think, with people with disabilities sometimes. And it's, as with anyone, consent is a huge, important issue. The way that I like to talk about it is that our bodies, our minds, and our lives as people with disability are constantly up for discussion. So we're talked about, but we're never really talked to. And the problem with that is when people say things about us or think things about us without our consent or our participation, then they get it wrong.
I love how you've phrased that we're always talked about but rarely talked to. But it's interesting because when you are spoken to, it's either inappropriate or it comes at a time that it's not wanted. In those uncomfortable interactions that you experience, Emily, is there anything in particular that you could tell people how to resolve those interactions?
Please don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think when you're thinking about how to act around people with disability, I think that the simplest, most practical advice I can give you is just to ask them and just be open about, just say, I want to do the right thing here, but I'm not sure what that is. I don't want to be offensive or anything, but, I'm just, will you help me? Will you tell me what you need? And most of the time, people are going to be more responsive to that than to you just jumping in and making a wrong decision.
That's so important. I hear from so many people in my other work, which is a researcher around disability stuff, that people really just want to be acknowledged before anything else. So there are so many people with disability out there that talk about saying hello first before saying what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And even that slight tweak in acknowledgement makes someone more open to a conversation. I wonder how you feel about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And more likely to, respond to the question that you actually want to know.
There are a lot of colloquialisms, maybe that's not the right thing, but in Australia there are a lot of phrases that are just part of connection and community that unfortunately come across very badly for people with disability, like, oh no, what's happened to you? Or, those kinds of comments. Would you say they need to go out the window, or would you say they're okay?
Lots of people have different views on this and very strong views on this. I think that as much as possible, we should try to remember to be conscious about our language. But as with anything, people trip up and make mistakes. I'm not a big fan of cancel culture. I think it has a place, but I think it can be problematic. And so, yeah, I'm a pretty open person, and I think most people are open to people who can see that you are trying to muddle through things, because we're all just muddling through life, right? And no one gets it right all the time. No one really knows what they're doing. So if you can just meet us in that sort of space, you're more likely to have a more authentic and comfortable interaction that will hopefully start you on a journey to becoming less uncomfortable.
You're blowing my mind right now, Emily. I'm piecing all of the things that you've said together and thinking that we do talk about these interactions as a very one-sided, maybe othering experience, like it's the person with disability against the person without disability. And the whole connection happens when we can recognize each other in that experience.
Absolutely. And like, I'm an expert in my own personal experience of disability, as you say. But as regards other people's disability, I try to do my best to learn and educate myself, but I make mistakes and are unintentionally ableist towards people. And what you do is you acknowledge that. You don't make a big deal of it. You try to repair the damage and you move on.
I'd love to hear your take on why you think those attitudes exist and why you think, going back to this survey finding, that number is so high.
I certainly think that there are other contributing factors. I think that probably a lack of exposure is the biggest one, because I think once you have exposure, you might not get things right all the time, but you at least have some prior knowledge to lean on. I sort of couch that by saying that once you know one disabled person, you know one disabled person.
Yeah, you don't know all disabled people.
So that's another issue. But I think that another issue which is sort of related is the lack of representation of disabled people or people with disability that we see in the media, because, as we like to say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And if people don't see people with disability in the sort of front and center, then of course people are gonna think that we're difficult to deal with or scary or overwhelming or whatever the case may be. I think there's another thing that happens where people confuse experience with disability with lived experience of disability. So, lived experience of disability, from my perspective, is the fact that I am a person with disability who comes up against attitudinal and other barriers every day. My parents, for example, have lived the experience of being parents of someone with a disability, which is a completely valid perspective, and it's a very important perspective that needs to be addressed alongside, but it certainly is not a lived experience of disability. The same goes for people who work in disability support sectors or education. All of those perspectives are completely valid, as long as they are complemented well, at some point at least, by the lived experience of people with disability. So yeah, I think that conflation can be an issue sometimes, where people get misinformed.
And how do you think that those two things being conflated quite often, how do you think that plays out in day-to-day life? When you're in those interactions where people are coming to you and they're confused, based on the survey again, how do you think that filters down the line? Can you almost tell? Because people with disability have a really fine-tuned lens. I feel like I can almost tell how someone's perception of me has been developed over time.
Yes.
By them just saying one single phrase or doing something inappropriate. It's like I can see how exclusion has, or, historical legacies of disability have come through the grapevine down to them, and it's presented to me in that moment.
I think a lot of these attitudes that we're talking about originate from good intentions. A lot of it starts from very early on. Say if children are born with disability and very well-meaning medical professionals or such diagnose them in terms of what they can, can't, will, and won't be able to do, those attitudes can be, as you say, fed down the line. I think organizations that work for and with people with disability have a great role to play in some instances, but also by their nature sometimes rely on the barriers that people face personally in their day-to-day lives. And when that gets presented to people, they think that is the dominant narrative. So there's, and it can be, but there's also a plethora of things that people experience alongside that. I like to say, life with a disability is hard. I know as a person with high care needs that life with a disability can be very, very challenging. And I think it's detrimental to try and gloss over that, which I think sometimes we do. But I think there needs to be space for both what is essentially, and sorry, this is getting a bit deep, but what is essentially trauma of having a disability and constantly coming up against social barriers, and joy, because these two things can coexist. People with disability have very, very joyous lives, but we would have significantly less challenges if those attitudes would change.
It's so important. I mean, the work that we've been doing at Attitude within media, which we hope extends into daily life, like you've discussed. But the work we've been doing is to try and change those media portrayals of being really polarized from either being total victims or complete inspirations, and bringing it to a more balanced place of we are real people with a diversity of life experiences and emotions and all of the things that everyone has.
And that's why I'm very sort of conscious about all the organizations that I work with and for, whether that be Attitude or any of the things that I do. I make sure to only work with people that understand that duality of experience, that yes, there can be challenges, but at the same time, there's also joy and hope. And
I'd really like to lean into the joy and hope just for a second. I know you apologized for being too deep, but I like the deep bits. Can we lean into, I mean, if we go to the philosophy of life, that real philosophical idea that life has to be light and shade, because otherwise, without one, we wouldn't know the other. And I wonder what that means to you as a person with disability when you're talking about joy and hope and all those things.
Well, it's funny. I have a saying that I'm kind of known for, and it just sort of organically happened one day when I was at the theater. I was with a friend and we wanted to get ice creams in the interval of the theater show. And, I just forgot that feeding someone, can be very difficult without, making a very big mess, right?
Particularly with ice cream, there's a time constraint on it.
And so we were laughing and trying madly to, clean up everything before the lights went down again. And my friend Julie, she said she admired my determination in eating the ice cream just because I was like, I'm just going to go for this and love it. And so randomly, philosophically, I said it was kind of like my life. She said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Life is like eating an ice cream. It's often difficult, sometimes messy, but always enjoyable if you know where to find the sweetness in it." So that,
I think there's your memoir just right there.
yeah, maybe we'll get, who knows?
So coming back to the survey, I love to hear people's theory of change based on their experience of the barriers and the enablers that they experience in their daily life. What's your personal theory of change? Does it mesh with Attitude's theory of change at all?
I'll start with my personal theory of change because I think you'll find that it matches up with what we do at Attitude. I just really think that disabled people having the opportunity to take up space and to be seen and heard and to define themselves on their own terms is important to change. And I think the media and storytelling has a really important role to play in that, because I think storytelling and authentic, inclusive storytelling is a way to break down barriers and enable people to, lead the lives they want to lead. And I think that challenges stereotypes and is a really great place to start. When people are moved or entertained, they're far more likely to be open to ideas that might be, challenging or confronting, I've found in my experience. So storytelling is a really great non-judgmental, non-confrontational way to do that.
And getting down into the nitty-gritty of that, given the work that we do at Attitude Foundation, how do we do that? So changing the narrative, I guess, is just one part of accessibility and inclusion in media. How do we do that?
I think just by providing opportunities, providing pathways for people to do what they want to do, I think is an important place to start.
And have you found that there have been barriers to you along those pathways on your journey?
As I have sort of mentioned, those attitudes are not only just in my personal life, but in my professional life as well. So that, I'm nearly in my 10th year of professional practice. And I'm still having to go on to projects and spend quite a lot of time proving my worth and my ability to make a contribution and make valued, creative decisions.
Gosh, Emily, your value is incredible and anyone would be lucky to have you. Can you imagine how much more impact you would have if you didn't have to go through that rigmarole every time?
Yes, and I have to make it clear and say this is not every project I've worked on, but there's still a long way to go till people just accept that I'm an artist in my own right, who particularly people I'd never worked with before.
Which I guess, some people would be listening to this as a person without disability and go, well, that's true of any job, you sort of have to prove yourself. But we go back to those attitudes and we go, no, there is this layer of, messy stuff that's on top of that generalized, this is a new job, I need to prove myself.
Particularly with people with disability in the arts, I think there's a place for the arts in terms of therapy and recreation and the benefits that it can have for people. I do think I've seen that be really beneficial. But I think that people look at all participation and contribution to the arts by disabled people through that lens. And so if someone sees me on a film set, they're likely to go, isn't that nice?
Emily, this has really reminded me of an experience of mine, and I feel like I have to share it right now.
Please.
So for those who are listening who don't know, I was once a model, and I was participating in it wasn't LA, it was Melbourne Fashion Week, actually. I'd gone down to Melbourne for Melbourne Fashion Week, and we were in the makeup chair doing my makeup, getting ready. And the lead makeup artist came over to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, wow, this must be such an experience for you. Are you excited?
Oh
and I was like, well,
that's what I'm talking about.
I was like, it's not as exciting as LA Fashion Week. There was certainly more involved in that. But, the fashion this year is kind of exciting, I guess.
Oh my God, that's so good. I also just love your response. And so, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Obviously, all people have to prove themselves in new jobs, but there's almost an added layer to that we have to break through. The way that I should have said this at the outset, the way that I look at it is that disabled people have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good.
Yes.
And I'm very good at my job. I'm not a modest person. I'm good at my job. And I will be very excited for the day when I don't have to spend ages and ages convincing people that I am good at my job.
I think, honestly, your work speaks for itself, and the more we can get you out there, the sooner that will happen.
Forgive my immodesty, but sometimes you just have to, for the sake of being fleet.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. Thanks for joining us. This has been the Attitudes Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the survey, visit the University of Melbourne website or head to the Attitude Foundation website for more information on us. This podcast wouldn't have been possible without Matt Field from the Attitude Foundation and Alex Varley from Northcott. Hosted by me, Angel Dixon, produced by Lucy Griffin, and edited by Simon McCulloch and Evan Munro-Smith.